Hello everyone and welcome back. So in the last video, we left to the point where we are trying to install SQL Server. Our operating system is ready for SQL Server installation. So what we will do in this video, we'll start with the SQL Server installation. And as you can see, I have downloaded the new version of SQL. And it's a small file. So what I'll do, I'll just right click and run as an admin just to avoid any permission issue when I'm going to install the binaries on the operating system. Now the installer has been changed, and that's the good thing, because previously you have to download the full ISO file to install SQL environment, but now with new SQL installation file, you can see it has 3 installation type. If you want to just install default options, you can just use click basic and it will install the database engine with the default values. And I believe it's going to be limited installation with limited features, which you can use for your operational work. But considering we are going to use this machine for all the analytical activities, so we are not going to use that. The second option is to install the custom. What it will do, it will actually load the SQL installer, and then it will let you choose the option, and at the end it will download and install the SQL Server altogether on your machine. Obviously that is going to take time, because based on whatever options you will select, it will decide what option it needs to or what libraries or file it needs to download from Microsoft side. And third is more like the legacy option, which we used to have previously with the old installation media, where you can download the full media and then you can mount that file with your computer, and then it will run on your machine, and it won't download it during the installation. And obviously that is the quickest one between these two. So considering I have already downloaded, so I'm not going to click on that, but just for your information, I'm going to show you how the custom option looks like. So see, it's asking, okay, where's the media location where we want to install once it's downloaded. So you can see we are going to select this SQL 2019, and if I click on, I think that's going to install all the full media. So let me cancel it out because I have already downloaded it. I'm gonna use that. So, and that's where you can see I'm actually running it first time on my machine. So that's why I didn't realize it's have the option to download the binary. So you can see it has created the installation file. I don't need it at this stage, so let me delete it, because I've already downloaded for you guys in the full ISO image on my machine. So what I'll do, I'll just mount it. So with the Windows 29, you have a very beautiful feature. Like if you have an ISO file, you just need to double click on it and it will automatically mount it with the virtual DVD drive. So you can see I have now the offline installer or the local installer media on my machine, and let's start the installation process. So while we are going through the installation, I'm also pointing out a couple of best practices that we normally do once we go and we install the SQL Server in our production environments, or once we will move into Azure, and we'll see the similar options there as well, that how Microsoft is segregating the files between multiple drives. And obviously that will improve the query execution performance and the response time. So just keep in mind, because this is the dev machine, so we are not putting a lot of best practices in here, because we are going to use it for evaluation, experimental, or development purposes. Let me now click on installation. Yeah, we are going to install the new standalone installation of SQL Server. But if you have noted down, we have now reporting services available as a separate component. Like, it is not coming as part of SQL Server installer like it was before. I believe up to 2014, and up to some extent till 2016, I believe reporting services was part of the SQL Server installation, but now Microsoft have decided to put it as a separate services. Maybe they are charging it separately. And then obviously we have the management studio, we have the data tools, and we'll see how we're gonna use, because most of the ETL work that we're gonna do, we need the SQL Server data tools. But at this stage, we are good to go. So let me click on the first option. All right, so like you can see, I'm using the free edition, and it's only for the evaluation purposes. Even like you can see in here, I can use the developer, and like I mentioned before, that developer has all the features, but all these features are available just from the experimental and non-business development purposes. Like, you cannot use that installation to produce any business oriented work, because developer edition is not going to be built for that purpose. If you want to build any business oriented application, it's pretty clear. You need to go and you need to purchase the relevant version, and Microsoft has different version which are addressing different business requirement. But keep in mind, developer version is purely from the learning and experimental purposes. You are not allowed to use it for any kind of business oriented purposes. By saying it, I'm just going to use the developer, or let me stick to the evaluation in this installation. Click next. Yeah, I'm accepting the license, and once you have time, you can read it through if you want to. Yeah, we are good to go. We can check the updates, no harm in there. Considering SQL 19 is quite stable, so I can't see any surprises during the installation. So now it is setting up the installation files for us, and then afterward it's going to actually bring the rules, and rules are more like the what services we want to install on our machine. So based on that, whatever option we will select, SQL will install the corresponding services based on our selection. While it is checking that, checking the setup and installing the setup file, let me quickly go back to the drive. If I can show you the drive fully. Yeah. And if you remember, once we built that virtual machine, we just created one drive, but theoretically in the production environment, we normally keep the SQL data files separately on different drives. So let me quickly show it to you how it looks like. How it looks like in real environment. So we do have, let me see what I can do to use brush. Let me quickly check if I can. Yeah, I think that's better. Yeah. So we do have data files. We do have log files. We do have files. Last but not the least, An excuse for my drawing skills. I'm trying to use my mouse to do all the drawing. And we do have binary files. Theoretically, all these files should have their own disk to improve the performance, because most of the time the query execution is downgrading or giving us issue because of the low disk response, because obviously SQL Server is a giant and it will consume all the available memory with whatever you can allocate to it, and once it doesn't have the memory, then it can start using the disk, and obviously whenever we run the query, that require a lot of read and write operation from the disk. So that's why it's the best practice to keep these files on their corresponding devices. So there's no bottleneck or there's no pressure on one particular drive. And if I actually just give you the example, so for example, data file we can place on D drive. Considering C drive is containing operating system files. So now you can understand. So that D drive is separate from C, where we keep our database MDF files. And obviously log file, for example, L drive is storing log files. And by the way, we're going to see all these files shortly after the installation. And T drive will store these TempDB files. And let's say E drive store SQL Server binaries. What I'll do during the installation process, I'll refer back to this diagram and we will see how we can make that diagram sense during our installation process. So let's switch back to the installer. I think the installer is fine. It's just giving us a warning Windows firewall, which I'm fine at this stage. Consistency validation has been passed. Computer domain controller check has been passed, and minimum CTP for upgrade side-by-side support is passed, right? So if any check has been failed, you will see that the installer is not going to progress. So let's click next. Now these are the rules, so which I was discussing previously, and you can see it has a bunch of options now. Now SQL Server is quite rich. Microsoft has put a lot of attention on their SQL Server product, and you can see the SQL Server has been evolved a lot in last couple of decades. So we have plenty of options. So whatever options we are going to select, it will install the binaries based on that. But before I do this selection, you can see it is asking us what's the shared feature directory, and on both Windows 86, program file 86 folder and program files 64-bit folder, right? So just to separate it out from the window drive, theoretically in the production environment, we keep it on a separate drive just to make sure the SQL Server is performing efficiently, because obviously that database server is going to address a lot of requests which is coming from multiple users. So we need to make sure the disk is not facing any additional process due to higher request load. So because in this server, I only have one drive, I'm not going to change it, but just keep in mind once you have your production workload, these drive mapping or this drive architecture will certainly help your SQL Server performance. So I'm going to select database engine at this stage. I don't need the SQL Server replication because we are not going to execute replication scenario in our environment. Machine learning services, we are not going to select in this instance. What I can do, let me select machine learning and Python, because we are going to execute Python packages. So I'll show you later on a couple of videos that how you can use Python within the T-SQL scripts. Data quality services, I'm going to show you data quality, that how you can use it. Analysis services, we are not going to touch in this series. We are not going to install a standalone server. Data quality client we need, client connectivity, integration services we need, and we are not going to scale out at this stage because considering we only have one server. Backward compatibility and master data services. So you can see these are the major components, and each service requires its own explanation beside the client libraries. So these are the ones that I have selected it. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to click next. It is validating, and I'm going to use the default instance, which is obviously the machine name. And that's where I mentioned that be very careful to give the name that you want to use on your SQL Server instance. Otherwise, if you give your machine a name and later on you change the name, that will impact on SQL. You have to adjust a couple of entries within the SQL configuration, which is obviously not a very good practice and highly non-recommended in the production environment. So default instance, you will see later on, we can access the SQL by the server name. But if you want to give it a name, like if you want to do multiple installation of SQL Server on single machine, first installation is always going to be default, which is referring to the server, and then the second one is going to be by name. So every service has its own name, and you can access that database version by the instance name. But in this instance, I think we are good. We are just going to install one instance on the server, and if we click next. And one more thing, we normally install multiple instances if you want to evaluate multiple version of SQL Server, if you want to work with different version of SQL Server in the dev environment. Now, with the advent of cloud, it's very rare that we are configuring SQL Server by ourselves and installing multiple instances on one single machine. I haven't seen in last 10 years where any organization they are installing multiple instances just to overburden the server. It's always recommended to have single instance servers, so it's going to be clean and easily manageable. I'm not going to change the username. I'm going to keep the security as it is, as default, but obviously I must made a point in here in production installation. All these accounts are going to be Active Directory accounts. They should be under the control of the infrastructure team, so they can assure that the service accounts were kept in the centralized Active Directory, and the security and policies are managed from the centralized Active Directory. A very good practice, and that will also assure that the ownership is with the right department. But if you try to start creating your own account and start putting the account and password, and you are not connecting it with the Active Directory, there are a lot of security risks that you're gonna face, and especially once the auditors comes in and they try to ask the question that who has access. So over there are a lot of I would say compliance issues that you might face, especially from the database perspective, because keep in mind, database is used to store data, and data can be any kind of data. It can be a very sensitive data, it can be just a generalized data. So just an advice. And I think if we hit on collation, because we normally keep the collation as default. I have seen another collation which is normally used. It's more like the policy and the time zone where you are working. So you're gonna see installer will automatically pick your time, the collation based on your time zone or the area, and then it will suggest. But obviously, if you want to change it, you can select all the available collation which is coming as part of the installer. But in this instance, I'm just going to use the default one. click next. Yeah, so now if we just use the Windows authentication, that means we are not able to connect to SQL Server using the SQL Server authentication, which is all in some organization is a good practice. Like we completely disable the SQL Server username and password, and the whole SQL has been derived through the centralized Active Directory. So imagine the whole security is manageable through your Active Directory, and you are only giving access to people through either the Active Directory groups or through Active Directory user, which is a very nice, clean practice that we should all follow in the production. But in this stage, because we are working in the dev and we need to execute a couple of scenarios where I believe we might need to use SQL Server username. So I'm just allowing mixed mode. What mixed mode means that it will allow SQL Server authentication as well as the Windows authentication. And I'm just going to put the password. And I'm going to add the current user as well as a SQL Server administrator. So you can see the local administrator is now becoming the SQL Server administrator as well. Keep in mind, the SQL Server administrator is different than the local administrator. Theoretically, the local administrators, they should have admin access on SQL Server, but if someone has admin access or sysadmin rights on SQL Server, it is not necessary that they are also the administrator of the server. Click on the data directory, and that's where you can relate this drive mapping back to this practice, which I've just discussed with you previously. So you can put each type of file on its corresponding drive in the installation during the installation, and that's the screen where you can mention the data directory separately. You can put the where you want to even these are the root directory where you normally keep all your data files, and with one exception, you can keep the system databases, and we're going to discuss later on what are the system databases and what are their functions. But at this stage, just keep in mind you can put them on the separate drive, and then even the user databases you can put it on a different data drive. And especially once you have more and more databases, it is recommended that to keep them on a separate disk. There are a lot of options to improve the performance. We are not going to go into that detail. We'll definitely discuss maybe later on during the optimization series. Like I mentioned, we have the log directory, and you can obviously put all the log files on the log drive. At this stage, we don't have separate log drive, so I'm just gonna stick to the default option. And backup directory. Backup directory is more like where you keep the database backups, because backup is another very important concept in the database environment. And if somehow something happened with your database, how you can recover your database to the last working state. That's the directive which normally keep all the database backups. Separate topic, we'll discuss it in its related video. Like I mentioned, TempDB. TempDB is more like the temporary area, and it will recreate as soon as the SQL Server has been restarted or even the machine has been restarted. But it normally contain all the temporary tables, which are either user defined or system defined or locally defined or globally defined. So any kind of temporary tables, and we're gonna see a lot of temporary table during our dev work. So keep that in mind, that all those temporary tables normally created in the TempDB. Obviously, these are the default values, but we can increase based on the requirements. So obviously, if your data TempDB is going to be heavily used by the user, 3 files are not going to be enough. So you might need to increase to maybe 5 files, and maybe initial size you don't want to actually increase every time the data is growing, because every time if the auto growth operation execute, that requires some time. So we normally initiate, so for example, we are initiating it let's say 128 MB each file, and then the growth chunk is auto growth chunk. Like every time when the file is full, it's gonna allocate 64 MB to the file until unless all the files have been full with the data. Same with the log file, because the TempDB is more like a database, and each database has two major files. One is the data file, and the other is the log file. So we can also set up the size of the file, and now here you can see the log directory, and here you can see the data directory. So that's why I mentioned that we can keep the temp database on a separate drive, just to improve the performance, or making sure that the SQL Server is efficiently responding the queries. And keep in mind in here that we will see the same thing in Azure SQL. Once we set up the Azure SQL, you will see how Microsoft is architecting the SQL Server in the Azure environment. Next up, these are the default values. Degree of parallelism we are not using in this instance. We'll keep it the minimum. Yeah, I think minimum we can stick with 0, but here is the most important value that most of the time people ignore, because what will it do, if you want mention the upper bound on the max limit, what SQL Server does, it consume as much memory as it can. So if, for example, on my machine I have 11 gigs, so if I want mention, and if the server has more and more requests coming from the user, it's gonna keep chewing up the memory until unless it consume all the available memory. And sometimes it really puts stress, or sometimes the server was stuck due to the unavailability of memory or CPU resources. So as a best practice, first I'll just do the calculation, and I'll allocate, let's say 9 gig to my SQL Server. So 9 4. By the way, that's the calculation to calculate, because in 1 gig we have 1024 MB, and you can use any online calculator to do the calculation. You don't need to remember that formula. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to allocate 9126 max memory. So once I put that upper bound limit, SQL Server cannot go beyond that limit. Let me hit next. I have to check this. Okay, all good. Because I'm installing Python, so that's part of the Python. It's installing the Anaconda stack for us, and Anaconda is more like a package that is available for us to do any kind of data science or machine learning work using the Python stack, and Python and R stack. We'll see it in a separate video. So let me accept it. Yep, I'm good. So let me browse. So there's something new. I'm just going to, for time being, I'm just going to create my workspace, considering we are right now not doing any ML part in this series. So let's stick to the option. I'm just providing it a path, and then we later on we'll see that how we can configure the machine learning path. Or somehow it is not liking it. So what I'll do, if I quickly go back, I think I just need to uncheck. So let me uncheck, because I do believe it is it's not including the machine learning, or I have to download the machine learning stack separately. Let me click next, let it run. Here's the default instance. Put it in here, so you can see it keeps my all the option intact, so it's not actually losing all the option because I haven't actually canceled my installer, which is really good. Like, so now you can see the option is not there, and quickly describing the error because I have selected the machine learning option in the database engine, but in my installer these libraries are not available. So either I have to download it separately somewhere and then point the folder so it can use the installer from that folder and install it, or I can uncheck and later on reinstall after installing the the database engine. So I think we are pretty good. Normally we keep that INF file because it keep all the configuration. So let me just open it up so you can see that's the configuration file which we can later on use to install on another machine with the similar option or configurations, right? So but that's something separate. We are not going to look at it in detail, but what I'm going to do as a good practice, I normally keep the INF file just for my reference purposes. I think we are good. So let's hit install. Now the installation process has started. Hopefully it will install successfully. I'm just going to stop the video in here and I'll see you in the next video with the SQL Server installation, and then we'll do some post checks. So hopefully you will enjoy this video and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.